everything I do is important. Me embalming this body for this visitation is important, right? Me doing these removals are important. But the most important, I'm not going to be able to embalm that body or transport that body unless I convert that call, right? So that is the most important thing I could do for my business. And for me to talk to somebody who needs something is just on brand with what I do. I want to help people. I want to be relevant. I want to be necessary. And this is the way I do that. So to me, it's not an inconvenience. I mean, sometimes it is. Of course it is. My nieces are getting in the business, and I'll tell them, I said, our phones are our best friend and our worst enemy. I said, do I want to take a death call at 3 a.m? No, but I'm also glad that I'm able to wake up at 3 a.m. The Klein family couldn't or didn't have somebody who was able to. So I said, I keep that in perspective.
Welcome to the Direct Cremation Podcast with your host, Tyler Yamasaki. Hi, thank you for joining us on the Direct Cremation Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Yamasaki, CEO of Parting Pro, the #1 cremation arrangement software for funeral homes. If you like the content, please give us a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, and leave a comment. So today's guest has been a licensed funeral professional for almost 3 decades. In a true Gandhi-like moment, he became the change he wished to see in the world. He channeled all the dissatisfaction and disappointment he saw in death care around him and created Chicagoland Cremation Options, a cremation brand that would allow him to operate how he viewed death care. Since opening his doors in 2017, he's grown his company to serve over 1,500 families per year and has truly created a successful business in one of the most populated and competitive areas in the country. Please welcome today's guest on the Direct Cremation Podcast, Douglas Klein.
Hiya, how are you, Tyler?
Hey,
thanks for having me.
I'm doing well. Yeah, of course. No, thank you for joining me. I'm happy to hear your story, and I think others will find it quite interesting.
Okay. Well.
So today, before I kind of grill you on how you built such a big cremation business in such a competitive market so quickly, I really am interested in the journey that brought you here. Because, from talking to others in death care, a lot of what we find is that it's been really interesting, and that a lot of what their past experiences have done is it's really painted the way that they've built their businesses today. So maybe we can go back. How did you get into death care? What was your journey like?
I guess when I was very young, when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, we had a close family friend that was young, and she died tragically in a motorcycle accident. And I was born in 1974, so in the 80s, 90s, and maybe it still happens today. I don't see it as often, but you still brought your children to wakes, and I was at the door the whole wake, showing people in. And my mother, during the prayer service that night, said, you should be a mortician. And I said, well, what's that? So when I was a young man in grade school, I would tell people, people would ask me what I wanted to do. And I'd say, well, I want to be a mortician, which is a term, by the way, I dislike. I don't like that term. I'm not a technician in death. But anyway, and I guess it elicited somewhat of a response. During, again, maybe 12, 13 years old, my mom said, if you really think you want to do this, why don't I take you to the mortuary school? And I think we did that maybe when I was about 15 or 16 years old. And I met the dean. The dean showed me around, and I think she said, you'll do just fine. Just cut your hair and trim your sideburns. At that time, I had longer hair. I still have some longer sideburns. But I don't know if one truly knows what they want to do when they're that age. So as a younger man, I started working for a neighborhood funeral home. And I found that it was something that was very relevant to do. I mean, I remember in high school, the books you would read or were assigned to. I remember the book Walden, Henry David Thoreau. I think one of the first lines is that, he went to the woods to live deliberately. And I felt like, wow, I want to do something professionally with my life that's relevant. And so I found that maybe I had a future in it, that I had some talents that I could bring to, at that time, my jobs. Certainly being a personable person, being responsible, being empathetic. So that's how I more or less got into it. Literally attending my first wake, uh, sharing with people that's what I wanted to do. Of course, I probably liked the reaction at that time. Um, and then, working for a firm, I knew that that was the right fit for me in my, for my job and my future career. So, and that what's crazy is I'll be 50 years old, and I've been doing this since I was 18. I was thinking, my God, that's 32 years. I don't even know how to do anything else. I mean, professionally, I'm somewhat useless. And I think that a lot of people who dedicate their life to one thing, um, they just get into a groove, or it becomes just really part of their life or their life. And this industry is my life. Absolutely.
Yeah, I get that. I do argue that point, though. I believe that building successful businesses is a little transcends just death care. So what I would say is you probably would be able to jump into another industry, figure out the problem, and create something that is successful in that as well.
I'd like to think so. It's just this is all I know how to do. In fact, I didn't want to necessarily own my own business. That happened when I had gotten terminated. I was working for a firm for 17 years. And then, you know, at that time, I was 39 years old. I was like, what else do I do? And then I felt that that firm I was working for was such a high volume firm that, I couldn't even, how could I go into a role where I'm working for a firm that's doing 200 calls or 300 calls a year? That firm was like maybe a 4,000 call firm a year. I'd take 9, 11 death calls sometimes through the night. So, of course, in hindsight, you see that you're like, oh, maybe I was being reared for this or geared for this, so, but that's one of the worst things about my career is running a business. I don't want to run a business. I want to serve the bereaved. I hate being
Mhm.
somebody's boss. In fact, a lot of times I'll introduce my employees just as my colleagues or my associates. I almost cringe sometimes when they say, "Oh, I got to ask my boss." Like,
Yeah. I have the same feeling sometimes too. It's a little weird to say my employee or something. I usually like to say my coworker or someone I work with.
yeah, your
I don't know
colleague
what
or
it
what.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But nevertheless, you are the boss. You have built quite a decent sized business and
Don't
only
say that around my wife, Mary. She'll disagree that I'm the boss. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I own and operate Chicagoland Cremation Options. I started the business because I had gotten terminated from. I married my boss's daughter. I met her after 5 years of working for that company. I worked there for 17 years. He and I fell out. I got terminated, and it coincided with there's a fella in the marketplace or in the Chicagoland area who had gotten in some trouble. He had some issues with the federal government, and he had a lot of people back away from him. He had a crematory, and I knew him a little bit. I went to him and I said, "Hey," I said, I think I could rebrand this place." I said, "This is what I was doing for my last 17 years. I'd been in the business my whole life. He knew some of the people that I knew, and he needed the revenue, and I had a client base to serve. That I knew that I could, grow and engage with. Again, working for the company that I used to work for, I got to know a lot of people in the industry, hospice personnel, chaplains, and I was able to,
Mhm.
start my own brand and service my own client base. So,
Interesting. Yeah, that could be a whole story, I'm sure. But I want to talk to you about growing. I mean, I do know Chicagoland is a big market, big metropolitan market, a lot of people. So you're obviously going to have a lot more deaths in that area. But you did something or a bunch of different things that got you to being able to serve 1,500 families a year. What would you attribute as your maybe top 2 or 3 reasons why you were able to grow so large? Because I mean, anyone could just start up a new business,
Well, I'm
put
going
that
to
out
say
there
this
doesn't mean they're going to be successful.
in the most humble way, is that the cremation rate was growing. So, I mean,
Yeah, of course.
with the cremation rate growing, how many of the other firms in the marketplace were advertising that? So there continues to grow, but not as many. I mean,
Yeah.
the 60% of the people in Illinois are cremated after they die. With the last convention we went to, the Cana convention I saw you at, they reckon that by year 2034 will be 85%. So, if you're in the funeral business, you're actually in the cremation business. So what are you advertising?
Yeah.
So how did we grow? Well, we were advertising cremation. But how were we advertising cremation? I got a marketing team. Okay. And then I also knew that with the competitors I had in the market at that time, and it's mostly still true, I looked at what they were doing and I looked at what they weren't doing. And then I wanted to differentiate my brand and myself. So one thing that they weren't doing is they weren't answering the phones themselves. They're getting the answering service. Well, you just saw my niece setting this up. If my niece is, I'll be 50, she's in her late 20s, or just a lot of people, with our phones, with our search engines, if you can't get your instant answer, you're going to go somewhere else, So,
Correct.
I made sure that I didn't have an answering service and I was answering the phones myself. That is the most important thing I think anybody in our industry could do for their business is answer the phones themselves. And then, when you're talking to the client or they're talking to you, I wanted to make sure that I kept them on the phone as long as I could. I didn't want them to think, oh, that was 12 minutes. I don't have another 12 minutes. Chicagoland Cremation Options seems legitimate. They seem empathetic. They seem professional. So that's the first thing I did, was make sure that I answered the phones. I had a marketing team, and then I knew that I had to market my brand. And how do I do that? Which is, going to the nursing home, going to the hospice facilities. You can ask me a hospice company, I could tell you who their chaplains are. I could tell you who their nurses are. Okay. If you don't know these things, if you don't know where the people are dying, where they're actively transitioning at, and if you don't feel that, or if you don't promote your company as an extension of their care, and if they don't see you going in to the facility, I mean, I can't do all the removals, but we handle 80% of the removals in Chicagoland Cremation Options in-house. How many times did you and I reschedule this? If I have a removal in a hospice facility, I need to be there if I can, especially during the hours that the chaplains and nurses are there that know me. So I had my online marketing company, who Welton, Ring Marketing, and then I had me. And how do I market my business? Well, I show up at the hospice facilities. I make sure that the expiration departments know me, that the chaplains know me. I make sure that I'm answering the phone. And then, after you're answering the phone, I try to use every way to communicate with the family that I can. I make sure that I'm texting them while we're on the phone so they know exactly what we're talking about. Here's a snapshot of my business profile. This is how you get a hold of me. Here's a breakdown of the costs that we discussed. If I am able to get their email, we're going to send you the Panda Docs through Parting Pro. We're not transactional about this. You don't have to fill them out now. If you feel it's prudent to do, we'll keep them on file, but you have them in your inbox. Tyler, if I could send them smoke signals, I would. If I could have a tin can and a wire, I would. So I make sure that they're talking to me, that they're getting texts from me, they're getting emails from me, that they have everything at their disposal, right? I mean, I myself answer far more texts than I do emails. May I ask, do you answer more emails or texts? Which one? Email or text?
I personally answer more emails, but that's because the volume of email that I get.
Right. And that's normal. Yeah. So if I'm talking to Tyler, the content creator, what I do is I send both, because I don't know if you text or email more. Certainly you and I know people who are in front of their monitors more so than they would be, out in the field like I am, or So that's why I probably answer my text more. So anyway, so, growing it, getting a marketing team, and then who's my marketing here? It's me as the proprietor. I'm answering the calls, engaging with the client. I'm at these facilities who are actively in a position to recommend your firm. And, you and I were talking about reviews, but one of the things I'll do is if a family is kind enough to convey that the experience was helpful and positive, and, what I'll ask them to do is convey that to that hospice personnel who recommended me. I don't even ask for a review on that. I ask them to convey that to them, because that way that hospice personnel knows who they recommended. They're getting that feedback, and that makes them feel confident in who they're recommending. So with the cremation rate growing, with looking at what my competitors weren't doing, with getting a third party marketing help, and with me being the boots on the ground, so to speak, I was able to remember the first year. I wanted to retain one death call a day was my goal. And I didn't do that. I did 24, average 24 death calls a month, retained. Um, and then we grew at 25% a year, every year, like clockwork, 25% on the nose. And then the pandemic hit, and we, probably like many people in our industry, we just hung with it. I mean, I didn't know if I was going to die. I mean, I know I'm going to die, but I don't know if I was going to die in the pandemic. I mean, I remember going to nursing homes, and, you put on the protective gear, and they'd be like, zip yourself in down the hall to the left. So obviously, like many others, we had an influx in client families that we were serving, and then that never went down. And I would have expected that it would have, and it just didn't. Now it didn't. We weren't growing at 25% a year post pandemic, but we had an increase every year post pandemic. And what I attribute that to is, and I've heard this my whole professional life, is the phrase, wait until the baby boomers start to die. Average male lives to be 76 in our country. Average female lives to be 78. Well, you know what happened the year after the pandemic? The white American male was 76. And the average female started to die that lives to be 78 2 years later. So in a way, that pandemic and that call volume, what I think it did for anybody in this industry is kind of give them an insight to what was to come, as far as call volume and and clients. So anyway, that's how we had grown, with the marketing, boots on the ground, increase in cremation rate. That's how we grew Chicagoland Cremation Options, and still continue to grow our client base. So
what's really interesting when I'm talking to you is that you have a very growth focused mindset when you think about this. And I know your experience is also there, but everything about outward facing, how your company and brand is portrayed out to others, how they, interact with you is what you're really, sounds like you're really focused on, which, I think really builds a return business type of word of mouth type of business that's really hard to compete with.
Well, as far as growing, what I'll convey to my colleagues and my wife and family and friends is I just want to grow responsibly. I don't want to give shit service. That's my thing. So if we're able to grow, it just should be responsibly. And sometimes I think, Tyler, my God, can I really handle all, like, if, on Sunday we had 5 house removals from 4 o'clock till 10 o'clock. I was like, do I really, like, my God? And I'm like, yeah, of course, because, partly what gets me through is that, the people that I serve would love to have my problem, so, but yeah, we want to grow responsibly. Part of, to my, maybe to my benefit, but I know to my detriment, is I don't really care about the money. I guess I care about it if there wasn't any. But I just feel that if you love doing what you do, and you continue to engage in it, that the money will come. So, I get some of this from my competitors. They're like, why aren't you raising your price? And I'm like, I guess I would if you were raising your price. We'd be somewhat around the same price point. But I feel
Mhm.
like, with the volume that comes, I also feel that, or I know for a fact that what we advertise, and what our average client spends about $1,600 with our, and we market ourselves at
Mhm.
$699. So, we don't include the government fees; they're part of that. But who advertised the government fees? So yeah, I mean, we have a
Yeah.
wake tonight. That's where I'm at now, and we have private views. So we offer more than the direct cremation, and that helps helps the family, right?
Mhm.
Give them options. I mean, it's the name of the company, Chicagoland Cremation Options. You have other options aside from a non-ceremonial cremation, and I try to point or use phrases that other people aren't using. Like I won't use direct cremation. What is it?
Yeah.
Everybody does. I'll say a non-ceremonial cremation. A lot of it. If you're able
Mhm.
to, convey to them in a language or in terms that are a little different. You know, I think a lot of times that our clients think that when they're having uh, um, a cremation, that they're already doing something different. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from a family. I've never done this before. Our family isn't used to cremation services. So I think already they feel that they're doing something a little different.
Interesting. So I know that you say you get, families that do cremation, but you have cremation options. I'm assuming you do get some calls for burials,
Yeah.
or no?
Oh, yeah.
How do you handle that, or what do you do with families who either are originally looking for burials and maybe don't know about cremation, or like, I guess, what do you do with those families that are looking, because they are price shopping, or they are looking for their options around you?
Tyler, any family that calls me, I try not to use a word like no. I try not to
Yeah.
create any fences or barriers. I just say, yes,
Hmm.
we'd be honored to accommodate you. In fact, we have a prep facility. In fact, we own our own hearse. So because
Hmm.
I'm a licensed funeral director and embalmer in the state of Illinois, it's legal for us to conduct these burial services. So
Hmm.
there's very few times I'll say no to something. We try not to create any barriers, any constraints at all. It's just,
Yeah.
if they have an idea, I could phrase something. Well, let me see if we could address that, or let me see what the best possibility is. I'm
Mm,
not in a position to say no unless it's something
I see.
illegal.
Yeah. Well, even then, right? No, I'm just kidding. I wanted to go back to something you touched on a little bit earlier. You talked about growing responsibly.
Mm,
Um, you know, I do know that you answer the majority of the calls
yes, I do.
that you get.
At least if they're an at need or a shopper, yes,
Yeah.
as much as I can.
I know that you do. I mean, we've had to reschedule this multiple times because you had a pickup to do, or you had to visit a nursing home or something like that. I also know that you answer all the phones. So I guess my question goes to, at what point do you feel you've hit your limit? I mean, 1,500 is a huge number.
Right, but let's divide it by 365. Right? I
You
mean,
could.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, that's it's just math, right? So
Hmm.
that's six. Did I do that right? That's six a day,
Hmm.
five a day, something like that, right? No,
Yeah,
hold
like
on.
four. No, four. 1,500 divided by 365. 4.1.
I told you I can't do anything else.
Or if you want to do like work days.
That's four. That's four calls a day. That's on
Mhm.
average of four inquiries a day. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
awake for 16 hours usually in the day, if not more. So I'll tell you this, Tyler. If if all I had to do was answer phones, if that's what
Mhm.
I would do. And it's not my aspiration to be a telephone operator, but I just think that is the most important thing you could do for your business, is be the first one. Nobody wants that death call more than me. I was getting my chops busted a couple years back ago. We were at a convention in Las Vegas, and it was one. I think it was no, it was another funeral director, different state, and he's like, you don't have staff that answers your phones?" And I said, "No, I do." I said, "But if it's a death call, they they choose the option to talk to me. As far as if there's a death call or an inquiry into our services." I said, "If they're inquiring about death certificates and memorialization that they've ordered, then they usually talk to the staff on the back line." And they said, "But you're on vacation." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "But I said I monitor all the calls that come in because I want my marketing team to be held accountable if my phone's not ringing." And I said, what I do is all those calls that come in, whether it's a near need or a pre need or an at need, I said, I know that I fluctuate with about 5%. I secure 75 to 80% of the calls that come in. And I said, and our average ticket is $1,587 for our families. I said, when we went through to get to the convention center, I told the guy, I said, if you had a 75 to 80% chance of talking to a family for 3 to 15 minutes and getting $1,587 from that table, would you do it? And he goes, "Yeah, of course I do it." And I said, "Well, that's why I'm answering the phones, man." I said, that is why I'm answering the phones. I said, nobody wants that client. Nobody wants to serve that client more than me in my company. And maybe even with my other competitors. So I'm going to do the best I can to secure that call and serve that family. It's just that simple.
There was so much beauty in what you just said. I think that we need to break it down. So when you get calls, let's just say at need, price shoppers, that your, let's say, conversion percentage or the amount of families that if you talk to 10 family or 100 families, you are going to retain 75 to 80 of those, right? Those are going to become families that you're serving, 75 to 80.
That's right.
You also know your average cost per case, right?
Yes.
To the dollar, 1,500. Mm-hmm. I mean, what's funny is, you say that, but the way you just broke that down, I don't think is something that I think I would stress more and more and more, right? The price shopper call conversion is something that I think most people overlook. Another thing that you mentioned, you talked about, I don't want to be a phone operator. I think that's a little, I think you're downplaying that a little bit more, right? I mean, typically that would have been the arrangement meaning. Yeah.
And everything I do is important. Me embalming this body for this visitation is important, right? Doing these removals are important. But the most important, I'm not going to be able to embalm that body or transport that body unless I convert that call. Right. So that is the most important thing I could do for my business. And for me to talk to somebody who needs something is just on brand with what I do. I want to help people. I want to be relevant. I want to be necessary. And this is the way I do that. Right. So to me, it's not an inconvenience. I mean, sometimes it is. Of course it is. I'll tell, my nieces are getting in the business, and I'll tell them, I said, our phones are our best friend and our worst enemy. I said, do I want to take a death call at 3 a.m? No, but I'm also glad that I'm able to wake up at 3 a.m. The client family couldn't or didn't have somebody who was able to. So I said, I keep that in perspective to serve that client base. So, yeah, I mean that, it's all humbling, right? And it should be. We're around for a little bit, and do you want to help people or do you not want to help people? Doing this as long as I've done it, nobody's had that phone training that I've had, and nobody wants that call more with my company than me. So that's why I continue to be on the phones. And I think that a lot of times they want to talk to the proprietor, that they know that you're in it to assist them, not because you're paid per hour to do so. Does that kind of make sense?
No, definitely. It definitely makes sense. The only reason that I bring it up is not because I just think it is super important. I think that I've talked to, quite a few people on here, especially that have built big businesses, and they always there's always the similarity between the things that they focus on and the things that they are really doing well. The phone conversation is always vitally important. Knowing and interacting with all the hospices and nursing homes around the area is also secondly like super important. And then third is always having proper marketing and branding and making sure you get your name out there. And it seems like those are very simple. Obviously I know that there's a ton that goes into a lot of them, but those seem very simple, but they can be some of the most complicated things to execute well. Whether it's time constraints, money constraints, or just personnel
One of the
constraints.
challenges I have with that call volume is that you want to treat the ninth caller as much as well as you did the first caller, and it's just human to maybe lose your patience or be short. And I get very mindful of that as the calls come in the day, or just whatever, you're driving or something, and you just want to make sure that you're conveying what you do legitimately with empathy, listening to them, and you're treating them like that's the first death call you've gotten all day or all year, or that's going to mean everything. And that's a challenge for me, and I'm sure it's a challenge for other people, is that the more come in during that day, or sometimes people are just, are hard. Some people are harder to deal with than others. And then, when that's the circumstance, what I just think of is, well, maybe they're just more bereaved, or their state of bereavement is making them act this way, hostile or whatever. So, those are the challenges with those calls. But if I could, I would be on the phone,
Yeah. I mean, that's a very good way to think about it. And I think that shows why you've been able to do what you do in the numbers that you're doing, right? Like, you don't get here by accident. And so I think that these are all really amazing, amazing pieces of information that someone listening to this that would maybe want to grow their own brand would need to really focus on. I appreciate
and
you
I
because
here by accident. With me working for that high volume firm, the fella that I worked for who terminated me is my father-in-law. He had a high volume business. He's very successful in the market, and I was able to work there and hone my skills and perfect what I do. Probably I wouldn't be the professional I am now without working in that industry. I had a competitor talk to me about it, somebody new in the market, and I said, "Hey, man," I said, first and foremost, it should make us better professionals, having more competitors in the market. I said, second of all, not that we want to be obsolete. I mean, the more that come in, the more they're going to take your market share. But I said, but when we have that come in, I said, we have to lean on what it is we know and how long we've been able to do it and how long we've been able to perfect our craft. I said, it's going to make the difference.
So what do you see happening to death care in the near future? Let's just say in the next couple of years. Do you feel like things are changing? Do you feel like, there's new disposition options popping up, which, I think today are not taking any market share from any of the other disposition options. They're there, but everything has to start somewhere. Do you see any big shifts happening in the next couple of years? Even if the cremation rate grows, it's still only going to grow, a couple percentage points every year. So it's not like we'll see a huge shift in that. So do you think, unless there's a huge pandemic or something, worldwide pandemic, when those never happen, unless there's one of those, do you think anything's going to change?
You never see more of these natural disasters happening either, right? Like 2 hurricanes.
That's true. Yeah.
5s in 2 weeks. What do I think is going to happen? I think that what's going to happen is what the experts in the industry say is going to happen. The cremation rate will continue to rise. I think that anybody in our industry knows there's going to be less and less funeral homes. People are going to just, do more celebrations like they're doing now. But a lot of that just depends on how one lives their life and how one dies. I think that the biggest contributing factor to the lack of visitations is hospice, which is great. And I also think, by the way, let me say the lack of visitations is hospice.
Wait, can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
I will. But it's
Okay.
also how we're actively dying. So I don't have high cholesterol, but I have friends that do, and they're on steroid drugs. I mean, my grandparents'
Mhm.
generation, if they were sick, they got sick and they died relatively soon. Now, if you're sick,
Yeah.
they're able to keep you alive for a little bit. So I think that what people in our industry, if they're perceptive, have just seen that the families are having wakes for 2 or 3 weeks. They're not having wakes for 1 or 2 days. They just don't know it's a wake. They're they're having it with the person. Everybody's
Mm.
able to say their goodbye, or they're taking care of them. So that's going to just continue to happen.
Wow. Wait,
It'll
hold
be
on. That was that was quite a take, actually. I got chills on that one. That one was really interesting. I don't think that,
Yes. So,
you
and
know,
I think actually what you're
people are
going
looking
to
at it.
have, yeah, I think you're when people call for these celebrations of life, I'm actually seeing less and less of those personally, and I think
Mhm.
we'll continue to see less and less of those. Not that one's life isn't to be celebrated, or people want to do it. I think they're doing that more or less when they're in hospice. I think they're having more, at least with the celebration with the person there. I think they're having private dispositions more. So I think that as the years go on, yes, the cremation rate will continue to rise. Like the experts in our industry say, at the last convention we were at, should plateau, at least in Illinois, at about 85%. But I don't think you're going to have as many celebrations. I think that those are happening while they're actively dying in hospice. I've seen that more.
Interesting. That is so interesting.
Yeah, I've
Got
seen
it.
that.
So you're thinking before these funerals or celebrations of life or whatever you want to call them, the final celebration, they weren't prepared for the death that they are today. Like they weren't put on hospice. So many people weren't having prolonged end of
Mhm,
life chapters.
mhm.
So, having that final goodbye was more necessary. Now they're having those spread out over time. They're seeing family, they're getting together, they're getting a chance to probably say their final goodbyes a lot slower and a lot
They're
more,
processing out from the
with more
facility.
time. And
That's
so,
their procession.
yeah.
Yeah. They have balloons there. I mean, so I'm seeing more and more hospices engaging in that celebration of the person's life with the family while they're around. Are they doing that with the family that called me today, the 37-year-old who has the brain tumor? No, that's not happening.
No.
Per se. I mean, people are going there and saying their goodbyes, but they're not necessarily celebrating that person's life at that time. So, but I think that the longer people
Yeah.
live, or the longer that they're actively dying, I think that they're having these wakes and these celebrations with the people that are alive. I think they're worn out by the time that the death occurs. And I think it's a disposition service. Also,
Mm.
what I think we're going to find, and this doesn't bode well per se for our industry, is that the third party marketplace for memorialization. It's huge. I'll get this question. I'm sure a lot of the people who are in our industry get this question. They'll say, uh, "Can I bring in an urn from Amazon?" And my response is, "Yes, of course." And then the second thing I say is, because I can't compete with Jeff Bezos. All I want to do is make sure that you're looked after. But in our industry, we
Yeah.
have to, with more third-party merchandise, we have to put the charges in the non-declinable services. I had a family that called upon me last week. It was one of those 5 house calls that I did on Sunday. And the next day, they called a body donation facility called me, and they said, "Well, how much is it to transfer her into our care? We know you did the transfer yesterday. It turns out that the such and such family is a candidate for that donation." And I said, "Well, it's $1,150." She goes, "For the removal?" And I said, "Well, it's for the removal, but it's for the repository as well. It's a non-declinable item. I had to store her
Yeah.
in a temperature-controlled climate. So the removal's $650 and the repository is $500. Non-declinable item. That family ended up staying with us because of how much it was for them to switch. So
Yeah.
you're not always going to, of course, sell an urn or a keepsake, but you gotta, if you're able to keep your fees on those non-declinable items, they're not going to get the refrigeration from Amazon. They're not going to get the removal, more than likely. from anybody but your entity, and those charges should remain higher than the merchandise. Again, at that last meeting that you and I were at, that last convention, I had a vendor telling me I wasn't selling their product for a high enough profit margin. And I'm like, what do you care about my profit margin? Aren't you just caring that I'm selling your product? I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And I said, well, here's the deal, man. I said, for what you charge me for your product, I said, we make $400 on, instead of your recommended. I think his recommended price was something like $1,000 profit margin on. I said, I'd like to get that $1,000 profit margin, but most of my earns sell between $125 and $325, and then I have to pay the cost of the urn. So if I get $400 in just using your services, happy days. And if the client family is pleased with your product, and they're telling people about it, and they're telling people about me, that's what I want. I want that trajectory. I want to grow that business model.
So your outlook is interesting, but it's also, I wouldn't say, the best outlook for people in death care services either, right? Like if you're taking the celebration, if you're taking the celebration outside of the funeral home, you're looking at third-party vendors coming in, right? Like,
I give them those offerings. When you would ask me what I think is going to happen in the years to come, that's what I think is happening now, and it's just going to become more common,
So I guess like my question to you is like, how do you combat that as someone who's running a business in death care that has to now, share margins with other places, has to, deal with third party?
I put those profit margins on those non-declinable items. And then of course with those options that I give them and I share with them, depending on how the death occurs. And this is this has everything to do with whether that client is going to contract us for a private family viewing or a visitation. A lot of it just depends on that client. Here, we only secure maybe about 50 or 60% of our obituaries. And when my staff comes to me and they say, hey, sorry, they didn't want the obituary, I said, I get it. If they're a bust out, if there's some alcohol problems, or if there's a suicide or something, I said, but do they know that this is a free service and that it's okay to let people know that the matriarch of their family passed away? Because they might want to see those comments, that kind of thing. So I think that also feeds into that lack of celebration that I think is going to be happening in the future. I think they're celebrating more when they're alive, not so much after the fact.
I see.
It's crazy to think that, because you wonder through the history of humans, you have the same thing, right? You have people and conversation and hugs and laughs and whatnot. But I've seen this as the years going on. It's become more and more private, and I don't know why that is. I don't know why
it's not only it is private, but you also feel like the emotions are almost different when people die now, because, like you said, people aren't dying quickly as much anymore. So people have almost, the survivors have almost, the survivors have almost have already said goodbyes mentally, emotionally, and then when that time comes, there's almost a sense of relief, because that journey has been so long and arduous.
I hear that all the time. When a lot of times after the transport or after the initial call, I'll say, if we could set up a conference call, 5-7 minutes, we want to make sure that we're addressing your needs. One of the first things I'll ask the client is, obviously, did I call you at an inopportune time? Are you still able to talk? Second thing, it's very human. I'll say, were you able to get a little rest yesterday, all things considered? I cannot tell you how many times people have said, I had the best sleep I had in months, because they were worried that this was going to happen.
Yeah.
They were worried when it was going to happen, and then it happened and they were able to get a little rest, a little relief. And that's part of what I'm saying. And I'm all about celebrations. I mean, I don't know if there's anybody I know that likes to party more than literally. I like to celebrate everything, but I'm just seeing more and more of that. So as the years that I've been in business, and I have more options now than I've ever had. I have more banquet halls and more bars and more, funeral home connections where, I could utilize for this. I'm just not seeing. I'm seeing a decreased number of those. But things can change. But I think it's because people are dying differently and continue to die, and I think hospices are they're doing a little more of what uh, we've done in the past, whether that's a procession out or the soft quilt or the balloon release. I'm just seeing more and more of that.
I see. Interesting. That is one of the freshest takes we've had in a long time on this show.
I hope I'm wrong.
That was very.
I totally hope I'm wrong. I do, but that's how I see it happening. So, I remember there was a time where, where you always had a minister, right? There was always the clergy. And then I remember there was always a time where, not always, but it became more celebration of life, humanist service. Now there's no service per se. It's, what? They're going to get up and say some words, or we're just not going to do any of that. It's interesting to see,
Yeah, it is very, 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 very interesting. So what's next for you, for Chicagoland? What are you guys planning for the next year and beyond?
I want to get a few more locations because I think that with more competitors that I'm having in the market, that I need locations that people feel it's easier for them to pick up cremated remains. This is something, man, I remember very frequently, people would say, well, you're in, where are you at again? I said, well, we're in Schiller Park. We border O'Hare. You fly out of O'Hare. We border O'Hare to the south, and we border Chicago, at Irving Park Road. Wow, I got to add, we're all the way over. And I said, yeah, I get it. I was invited to a wedding that was like an hour away. I wish it would have been a little closer to me too. I said, but call around, and I'll mention certain companies. I said, call this company, that company, the other. And I said, and the money that you'll save, you might be able to take a helicopter here to pick up the cremated remains, or maybe you can take a limousine. And then they kind of, then they kind of get that reference. So I do try to create a little levity with it, but with different locations in different counties. I serve 6 counties. Obviously Chicago's in Cook County. It's the larger of the counties. So I serve more families in Cook County than I do anywhere else. But I'm thinking about having other locations based upon just for families to pick up and not lose business, even though it's 35 minutes away or 45 minutes away. Some families, they want something a lot closer to them. So I wonder.
So less about growing the front end, not
on these calls. I don't convert. I go through and I'm like, okay, they might not like my voice or my price point, but I think a lot of it is location. And so I want to, when you're asking what we want to do in the future here, I want to get some of the junior members of the staff licensed. I want to get them acclimated to how we're doing things, and I want to grow and have a few more locations because I don't know if I'm peaking out or close to peaking out just at my one facility for those at-need arrangements. I think I need a couple more locations. So that's what I'd like to see happen. So
on a personal note, how are you personally, how do you not burn out?
How I don't burn out. I don't burn out, or I haven't encountered that burnout, or maybe I have. My wife seems to think that I have. Is because I've always wanted to do this, and I feel humbled that I'm able to do it for the general public, for myself, to grow that. And I always feel that whatever my problems are, that my client base would love to have them. Now, sometimes I think maybe they did, and that's why they're now my client family. But I feel humbled that I'm able to do this and honored to do it, and I just enjoy doing it. So it's for how do I not encounter burnout? How can you burn out? I guess you can burn out on something you enjoy. I don't know. I just haven't gotten there yet. I don't know.
I mean, I don't think it's a secret to be a good funeral director. There's a lot of emotion that you have to share and a lot of empathy that you have to share. And that's not unlimited. I know you talked about, you want to talk to the ninth family like you talked to the first family, but at the 10th call of your day, it's still going to be hard no matter how much you love that,
Absolutely.
I could go.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I,
And I get mad at myself if I don't feel like I'm at my best with it. Um, I'm lucky to have a wife who does what I do professionally, and where I'm able to
yeah.
roll things off for her. She's able to roll things off me. I'm lucky to have a large friend group. A lot of those friends I've had since I was an adolescent. So there's a lot of talking that I do with my friends and with my wife. I also like to have a good time. So I treat myself very well. You know, I I laugh a lot. I have good meals. So I live a life. It's just that it's interesting living your life. This profession is so much a part of my life that I don't want to say it defines me, but it's something that I bring with me all the time, especially when my phone rings.
So we like to ask this question to everybody that's come here. Everyone has their own perspective. They've all lived different lives to get to where they're at today. And so I feel like that shapes what your outlook is going to be. You've kind of touched on it a little bit on the near term, but what do you think death care looks like in 10 years? Now, you look at the data as well, and you see that cremation rates are going to be 60, 70, 80% in the next decade. So what do you think that makes death care look like?
It's going to be a disposition business. The clients that, when I say my best clients, the clients that find most relevance in what I do are first generation Americans. I don't care if they're from Eastern Europe, Latin America, Southeast Asia. Those are my best clients because they find relevance in what we do. They appreciate what we do. They tend to have services. They tend to have memorialization. My worst clients are me, white guy in a suit, where you've been here for 3 or 4 generations. I'm serious. You've been here for 3 or 4 generations, and they want the death certificates because there's an inheritance, and this family member took care of them for the last 6 months and wants more, but mom and dad lent them money and they never paid it back, and now there's a death in the family, and we just want it over. I will continue to see more of that. Anybody in my business will continue to see more of that. I hate this scenario. I hate even saying it, but here's the scenario: dead person in the family. What do we do with them? I want this to go away. Can't this just be over? I hear that all the time. And of course it's never over fast. Doing this professionally, there's a bereavement process, that there's stages of grief, but what I see in the future doesn't bode well for our industry. I think it's a disposition business. I wish it wasn't.
That's interesting. So what do you think that looks like for all the providers? There's only going to be a couple major ones that kind of handle the dispositions.
Well, it depends on what happens to the economy in a lot of ways. My father-in-law would say, who wants this job? Who wants to be on call and woken up? And there's easier ways to make money. And, if you're a programmer, there's this, a lot of the people that I know that have funeral homes, their children aren't getting into it, that kind of thing. So what I imagine will happen is that it will just continue to be more corporate. I think that the independent people who get into it have an advantage to gain market share just because they want to do it, and they're it's more of a personable experience. But I love doing it. You got to have somebody who loves to do it. You got to have somebody who feels relevant doing it, who wants to do it. And if they're doing it for the money, I don't think they're going to last. But I do think that there's just going to be more and more corporations. And I think that the price will finally rise. I think that the independent companies are the ones who are keeping costs down because they're fighting over market share. Tyler, I have to tell you, I hope I'm wrong about a lot of this stuff. And I'm no Nostradamus.
You aren't, but you bring a lot of facts and receipts to the table. So,
I do.
When you say something, it's something that you do talk a lot, but what you say actually you can back it up. And so when you make these predictions, like I think they are worthy of looking at or preparing for, or at least keeping in your mind that this is a potential outcome for death care, and what's going to happen. So,
Tyler, you and I were talking earlier about the pandemic. The pandemic in our lifetime, I think, is the first tragedy that happened that didn't bring people together. I think it made people more angry. I think it divided us, and I think that we just continue to see this contention when money's involved and stuff. So that's why I say that my favorite client or my best clients tend to be a first generation who still like have a sense of worship and religion and love for and honor for their parents and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I'm saying. The longer you're here for, generation wise, the more they fight over it. It tends to be a disposition business, and the less relevance they have.
Well, do you feel like? I mean, do you feel like too, though, that I feel in other countries there's less of a taboo around death, and there's more of a simpler celebration of what you need to do. And I could be wrong on that. I know in certain countries, but in overall, when you look at, let's say, like the Asian countries, for example, when someone dies, there's a very clear path of what you're supposed to do, and it doesn't, it's not always that long, and it's a little simpler, right? You kind of do the thing and it's over, right? Here, I feel like, here I feel like it's how it was at one point. How big can it go? How much can you pour into this to celebrate or show that this was a loved person, right? How big can it get? And that's not necessarily what it's like in other countries.
Our traditions tend to be more blunderbuss, yes, absolutely, because of the family structure being, all over this vast country, or people maybe being more mobile or more transient with where they've lived. You just don't see those traditions, right? So,
all right, cool. Well, Doug, I know you're a busy man, but if anyone does want to reach out, or you maybe want to plug some of your brands, some of your brand, actually.
You mean if somebody's in need of my services? I have a feeling if somebody's in need of our services,
no, this is not like not a public.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm assuming most people who listen to this are in our industry, but Chicagoland Cremation Options, 773-631-0018. Our website, chicagolandcremationoptions.com. I'm hard to nail down, but I'm not too hard to get a hold of. Anytime you've called me, we've been trying to do this for a while. Every time you've called me, I at least call you back or text you back. So
no, we've rescheduled successfully many times. It's not like you are always one to answer the phone. You're always one to respond.
It's help. I always get back to you. Just give me a chance. So
yeah,
but I appreciate you having me on. Aside from putting this tie on today, this is the whitest thing I've done all day. Being on a podcast.
Yeah, no, I get to. Yeah, that's hilarious. I get to see you at all the shows, but you're always working. You're always on the phone, even at the shows, but you're there. So I try to be. I do get to see you. So
if I can, yeah. I guess
so yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time, Doug. I think you had some really insightful things to say there. I think the perspective that you have is interesting because if you're right, it kind of does put a lot of businesses in danger in the next decade. But at the same time, there's a lot of reasons why what you're saying can come true. So,
and your product, yours and Albert's, really is a great contributing factor to our success. It makes it so easy for our clients. So, I know I say that to you all the time, but it's worth saying now, recorded. But it's true though. I know you.
I appreciate that. Yeah,
and I look forward to these recent modifications that are happening. What you're doing, good job, man. No, honestly.
Right. Well, I appreciate it, Doug. Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah,
I do well.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I hope the Dodgers win tonight.
All right. Well, I do too. I normally leave the light off because it's like annoying, but for those, but today's a big game, so
Yeah. Well,
Thank
good
you
luck.
very much, Doug. I really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
I'll send you pictures of my Akitas. I'll get them from my wife tonight. I take on telling her, send Tyler pictures of our
Yes,
Akitas.
please do. I do want to see the Akitas. Yeah, I had some growing up too, so I'd love to see those. So the Direct Cremation Podcast. I'm Tyler Yamasaki. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you ever want to know more, please find us at directcremation.com.